The medieval world was far larger than the castles of Europe. Across the globe, epic battles and strategic campaigns redrew the map of entire continents. Yet many of these pivotal conflicts remain outside our common historical narrative. This journey will uncover 35 such medieval clashes that reshaped Africa, Asia, and the Americas, revealing a world of interconnected empires and forgotten wars. By the end, you will see the entire medieval era through a completely new lens, understanding how power was truly won and lost. How did a single battle in the Middle East save Africa from invasion? And what secret wars in the Pacific determined which islands were settled for centuries? What does the word medieval truly mean to you now? The word medieval often brings to mind images of European knights and stone castles, but this narrow view misses the true scope of a world in motion. For centuries, roughly from the 5th to the 15th, powerful empires were rising and falling across Africa, Asia, and the Americas in a period just as dynamic as anything happening in the West. Historians now speak of multiple Middle Ages unfolding at once around the planet, each with its own distinct political dramas, cultural flowerings, and military innovations. This reframing is essential because it allows us to see a more complete and accurate picture of our shared past. When we step away from the familiar story of Europe, we can finally appreciate the profound significance of clashes that decided the fates of continents, conflicts that were every bit as world-changing as the Crusades or the 100 Years' War. By broadening our definition of what was medieval, we prepare ourselves to understand the scale and lasting impact of the battles to come, many of which have been waiting centuries for their stories to be told. Deep in the heart of West Africa, a new kind of power was emerging, built not just on land but on the flow of commerce. The Ghana Empire rose to prominence by mastering the arteries of the trans-Saharan trade, a network of caravan routes that connected the continent. Their strategic genius lay in controlling the exchange of two vital commodities, gold from the southern forests and salt from the northern deserts. This was not merely a peaceful exchange of goods, it was a form of economic influence waged across vast distances. The empire's leadership fortified key trading centers and formed strong alliances with the nomadic Berber groups who navigated the dunes, effectively creating a protected commercial corridor. Any neighboring state that challenged this control soon faced the disciplined cavalry and infantry of the Ghana, forces dedicated to safeguarding their economic lifeline. The wealth generated was staggering, filling the royal treasury and allowing for the expansion of cities that became centers of learning and culture. This commercial dominance fundamentally altered West Africa's position in the world, connecting it to North Africa and the Mediterranean and establishing the region as an economic powerhouse. The legacy of Ghana demonstrates a profound historical truth that the ability to control trade routes and vital resources could reshape a continent's political landscape as decisively as any other form of influence in its time. But the Ghana Empire's commercial dominance would not last forever. Power in West Africa was about to shift in a dramatic and decisive way. The Songhai Empire, once a subject state, began its rise under the ambitious leadership of Sunni Ali. He saw the weakening Mali Empire not as a former master to be respected, but as an opportunity to be seized. His strategy was one of constant movement, built upon two key military strengths. The first was a powerful navy that patrolled the Niger River, turning this vital waterway into a route for his troops and supplies. The second was a highly mobile cavalry that could move deep into Malian territory with remarkable speed. These forces worked together, surrounding and securing key urban centers. The famed cities of Timbuktu and Janai, great centers of trade and Islamic scholarship came under Songhai control. This was far more than a simple change of leadership. It was the careful restructuring of one empire and the consolidation of another, far larger state. Under Sunni Ali's successor, Askia Muhammad, this new empire was organized with a sophisticated system of provincial governors and specialized administrators. This structured approach allowed the Songhai to effectively manage the vast territories they now commanded, guiding the flow of gold, salt, and ideas across West Africa for over a century. Their rise set a new standard for what an empire could be in the region, showing that military strength, when paired with thoughtful governance, could reshape the landscape for generations. East of the mighty Songhai, another empire was forging its own path to power around the vast, life-giving waters of Lake Chad. The Kanem-Bornu Empire understood that controlling this inland sea was the key to influencing the entire region. Its rulers, the Srivijaya dynasty, wielded a powerful combination of military strength and unifying religious faith to expand their territory. They proclaimed spiritual campaigns aimed at bringing neighboring peoples into their growing state. These efforts were not solely about faith. They were a sophisticated tool for political integration, uniting diverse groups under a single banner and a common system of belief. This ideological framework provided a powerful justification for expansion, allowing the empire to welcome communities into a larger, more cohesive political structure. With their influence secured, Kanem-Bornu turned the Lake Chad basin into a bustling crossroads. Their mastery of cavalry warfare ensured that trade caravans moving north across the Sahara were protected, making the empire a vital link between the interior of Africa and the Mediterranean world. This flow of goods was matched by a flow of ideas, as cities like Njimi became celebrated centers for Islamic scholarship and law. The empire's borders were never static. They shifted outward and contracted inward with the success of its military expeditions and the careful arrangement of diplomatic marriages with neighboring rulers. This constant, dynamic reshaping of influence across the Sahel demonstrates how a state could be built as much on belief and commerce as on strength alone, leaving a political and cultural legacy that would endure long after its cavalry had passed. High in the rugged highlands of East Africa, a Christian kingdom carved its legacy directly from the mountains themselves. Aksum, and later the powerful Ethiopian state, faced a constant challenge to preserve its sovereignty in a region where its faith made it unique. This was not a single confrontation but a series of long, grinding periods that tested the kingdom's endurance against powerful neighbors and internal differences. To the north, the mobile Baja peoples contested control over vital trade routes and grazing lands, their movements demanding constant attention from the Ethiopian rulers. A far greater challenge emerged from the east, where the Sultanate of Adal, a powerful Muslim state, sought to question the highland kingdom's dominance. These were not merely clashes of armies but of worldviews, with the very identity of the region at stake. The Ethiopian response to these pressures was as ingenious as it was enduring. They turned their landscape into their greatest defender, constructing incredible churches hewn directly from solid rock. These were not just places of worship, they were formidable strongholds, their entrances narrow and easily secured, their locations often hidden within the cliffs. In times of tension, these sanctuaries became places of refuge, protecting communities and sacred treasures. The mountainous terrain itself became a strategic advantage, where narrow passes could be held by a few against many, and outside forces found their numbers and supplies stretched to the limit. This thoughtful use of geography and architecture allowed the Solomonic dynasty to navigate internal disagreements and external pressures alike. Their success in these extended struggles ensured that Ethiopia remained an independent Christian state, a unique and enduring political and cultural presence on the world map. Its identity preserved through a combination of faith, stone, and an intimate knowledge of the land they called home. Far to the south, another empire was being built from stone and gold. The Kingdom of Zimbabwe mastered the art of consolidating power across the vast Zimbabwe plateau, creating a state whose influence would stretch across the Indian Ocean. Its rulers understood that true strength came from controlling the region's most valuable assets. The most visible of these was the incredible stone complex we know as Great Zimbabwe, a city whose very walls were a statement of authority. These massive, unmortared structures were not just a royal residence, they were a formidable center for administration, projecting an image of permanence and power that impressed both local communities and foreign traders. But stone was only one part of their strategy. The kingdom sat atop some of the richest gold fields in southern Africa, and its leaders established a firm connection to this precious resource. They managed the mines and the people who worked them, guiding the gold toward the coast. This required mastery over the trade routes that moved eastward to the thriving Swahili city-states like Kilwa. By overseeing this flow of gold, ivory, and other goods, the rulers of Zimbabwe positioned themselves as essential partners in a vibrant international network, receiving in return luxury fabrics, glassware, and ceramics from as far away as China. Perhaps their most ingenious tool of influence was something more fundamental: cattle. Herds were the true measure of wealth and social standing on the plateau. The royal family accumulated vast numbers of these animals, using them to build alliances and secure loyalty from surrounding communities. A local leader who received cattle from the king was bound in a relationship of mutual support. This system of patronage, blending generosity with expectation, allowed Zimbabwe to integrate neighboring territories without constant conflict. It was a process of state-building that relied on both the symbolic strength of stone structures and the tangible benefits of economic partnership. This careful balance of influence and alliance created one of southern Africa's most powerful early states, a kingdom that successfully guided the flow of wealth and ideas for centuries and left behind architectural marvels that still command our wonder today. Along the sun-drenched coast of East Africa, a string of independent cities thrived on the rhythm of the monsoon winds. From Mogadishu in the north to Sofala in the south, rival centers like Kilwa, Mombasa, and Malindi turned the Indian Ocean into their shared marketplace. Their wealth was built on a sophisticated maritime network, their elegant house carrying African gold, ivory, and timber east to India and China, returning with silks, spices, and porcelain. This was not a unified empire, but a constellation of competing ports, each vying for a larger share of the ocean's riches. Their disagreements were local, expressed through fleets of ships and fortified stone walls along the coastline, a delicate balance of power maintained for centuries. Then a new presence appeared across the water. At the close of the 15th century, Portuguese carracks arrived, their heavy cannons and relentless ambition disrupting the old order. These newcomers were not interested in joining the existing trade. They sought to control it completely, to monopolize the very sources of the wealth that had built the Swahili cities. The Portuguese approach was direct. They leveraged the long-standing rivalries between the city-states. They offered alliances to some, like the strategically positioned Malindi, and directed their naval strength against others. The great city of Kilwa, once the dominant force in the gold trade, was persuaded to cooperate after a swift show of force. Mombasa, proud and determined, held its ground but faced overwhelming pressure, its community experiencing a period of adjustment before accepting new terms of commerce. This intervention altered the fabric of Swahili sovereignty. The ancient competitions that had once defined the coast were now guided by an outside power, creating complex alliances and difficult choices between neighbors. The result was a complete reconfiguration of the regional map. Political influence shifted from the old centers, commercial routes were redirected to serve outside interests, and the entire coast entered a new and uncertain era. This moment on the East African shore stands as a powerful lesson in how external forces, by understanding and leveraging local divisions, could permanently reshape the lines of influence and begin a chapter of global interconnection defined as much by challenge as by commerce. From the Swahili coast, we journey north to a different kind of power struggle, one that would realign the heart of the Muslim world. The Fatimid Caliphate emerged not as a mere rebellion but as a rival vision for Islam itself. Originating in Tunisia, this Shia Ismaili dynasty viewed the Sunni Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad as lacking legitimacy, and they supported this belief with a formidable military ambition. Their goal was nothing less than the control of Egypt, the wealthy province at the core of the Abbasid Empire. To lead this monumental effort, they turned to a man of extraordinary talent, General Johar al-Sakili. His name itself tells a story, meaning Johar the Sicilian, a reminder of the interconnected Mediterranean world that shaped him. He was more than a warrior, he was a master organizer who built a highly disciplined, multi-ethnic army. His forces included Berber cavalry from North Africa, Slavic soldiers from Europe, and African infantry, all united under a single command structure. This was not a chaotic horde, it was a professional military machine moving with purpose. The campaign began in the year 969, as Johar's army marched east from Tunisia. Their advance was a lesson in strategic planning. Rather than engaging in unnecessary battles, Johar secured the loyalty of local tribes and city governors along the route, offering them favorable terms within the new Fatimid order. When his forces finally reached the Nile Delta, they found an Egypt weakened by internal disagreements and distant governance from Baghdad. The existing rulers, a mix of Abbasid loyalists and independent leaders, could not present a united front against such a coordinated advance. The key city of Fustat, the old administrative capital, was secured with little conflict. Johar immediately demonstrated that his mission was one of construction, not just conquest. On the outskirts of Fustat, he personally laid the foundations for an entirely new city, a royal enclosure designed to be the caliphate's fresh capital. He named it Al-Qahira, meaning the victorious, a city we know today as Cairo. This was a profound symbolic act, the establishment of a new political and spiritual center for the Fatimid cause. The shift in control had an immediate and far-reaching impact. By guiding Egypt, the Fatimids accessed the immense agricultural wealth of the Nile, funding their expanding state. They now sat astride the most lucrative trade routes on Earth, linking the Mediterranean with the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean beyond. This economic power allowed them to challenge both the Abbasids in the east and the Byzantine Empire to the north, creating a triangular balance of power that defined the medieval Mediterranean for 2 centuries. The Fatimid rise was more than a change of government. It was a seismic shift that split the Islamic world, creating a new axis of religious authority, cultural brilliance, and commercial influence whose echoes would be felt long after their dynasty faded from power. The Mongol tide that had swept across Asia finally met an unyielding wall in the dusty plains of Palestine. In the year 1260, near a spring called Ain Jalut, the Goliath of the steppes faced a David forged not in royal courts but in military service. The Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, led by Sultan Qutuz and his brilliant general Baybars, stood as the last major power capable of stopping the seemingly unstoppable Mongol advance. This was more than a battle. It was a collision of two vastly different ways of waging war, and its outcome would decide the cultural and political future of the entire Middle East. The Mamluks themselves were a product of a unique system, individuals taken as boys from the Eurasian steppes and rigorously trained in cavalry warfare and military strategy. They were the ultimate professionals, answering only to their own chain of command, and they understood the Mongol tactics because, in many ways, they came from the same world. When the Mongol commander Kitbuka, a respected and experienced general, led his forces into the Jezreel Valley, he expected the familiar pattern of swift conquest. He found instead an army meticulously prepared to turn his own strengths against him. The Mamluk strategy was a masterpiece of deception and terrain management. They used the landscape itself, funneling the Mongol cavalry into a confined space where their famous mobility was constrained. Then, the Mamluks executed a classic feigned retreat, a tactic that requires immense discipline. A portion of their forces appeared to break and flee, luring the confident Mongols into a headlong pursuit. This was the trap. The main Mamluk force, including their heavily armored cavalry, lay in wait, hidden from view. As the Mongols charged after the retreating unit, they were suddenly surrounded on three sides. The battle dissolved into a close-quarters engagement where the Mamluks' specialized training and intimate knowledge of steppe warfare gave them a decisive edge. The Mongol army was decisively defeated, and Kitbuka was lost in the conflict. The victory at Ain Jalut sent a shockwave across the known world. For the first time in decades, a Mongol field army had been met and overcome in a pitched battle. This single engagement halted the western expansion of the Mongol Empire, saving Egypt and North Africa from invasion and preserving the heartlands of Islamic civilization from a fate that had befallen so many other great centers. The Mamluk Sultanate was not just saved, it was catapulted to the status of a major power, the recognized defender of the Muslim world. The battle proved that the Mongol war machine, though formidable, was not invincible, a psychological turning point that changed how empires from China to Eastern Europe calculated their own chances of resistance. The line had been drawn, and the map of the medieval world was permanently altered by the very individuals who had been brought in to defend it. Yet the fall of one empire often clears the ground for another to rise. While the Mamluks secured Egypt, the coastal lands of the Levant had become a complex and volatile frontier, a space where identities and ambitions constantly shifted. The Crusader states, including the Kingdom of Jerusalem and the County of Tripoli, were not simply European outposts forever under siege. They were political entities that had put down local roots, their survival depending on a fragile web of alliances, economic agreements, and shifting loyalties that frequently crossed religious lines. Their most significant conflicts were not with distant European kings, but with the rising Muslim dynasties on their very doorsteps, particularly the Zengids and later the Ayyubids under the legendary Saladin. These were not endless holy wars, but a series of calculated campaigns for strategic castles, control over lucrative trade routes, and the allegiance of strategically vital cities. The relationship was often more pragmatic than pious, with temporary truces and even military cooperation between Crusader and Muslim rulers when it served their immediate political needs. This intricate dance of conflict and cooperation reached a dramatic climax with the rise of Saladin, a leader who skillfully unified the Muslim factions of Syria and Egypt under his banner. His victory at the Battle of Hattin was not just a military triumph, it was a masterstroke that removed the organized military power of the Kingdom of Jerusalem in a single day, leading directly to the recapture of the city of Jerusalem itself. This event triggered the Third Crusade, bringing figures like Richard the Lionheart of England onto the stage. The famous encounters between Richard and Saladin were as much about personal reputation and political maneuvering as they were about faith. A series of brilliant marches and countermarches, sieges and negotiations that ultimately resulted in a treaty allowing Christian pilgrims access to Jerusalem while leaving the city under Muslim control. The real, lasting impact of these generations of interaction was the consolidation of powerful, centralized Muslim states in the region. The constant pressure from the Crusader presence had, paradoxically, helped forge the very unity among their rivals that would eventually lead to their own departure from the mainland. The map of the Eastern Mediterranean was fundamentally redrawn, not by a single battle, but by this centuries-long process of political and military friction that reshaped alliances, defined borders, and left behind a legacy of cultural exchange that would influence the region for centuries to come. A single day in the highlands of Armenia would echo for 1,000 years. In 1071, the Byzantine Emperor Romanos IV led a powerful army east to confront the growing influence of the Seljuk Turks. He was confident in the might of his professional soldiers, but his campaign was hampered by political friction back in the capital. This internal disagreement would prove to be his undoing. At a place called Manzikert, the emperor faced the Seljuk Sultan, Alp Arslan. The resulting engagement was less a straightforward battle and more a masterclass in tactical deception. The Seljuk forces employed their signature hit-and-run attacks, their mobile horse archers harassing the Byzantine lines, then feigning retreat to draw portions of the imperial army out of position. At a critical moment, a key Byzantine commander, swayed by political rivalries far from the field, ordered his troops to withdraw, believing the day was lost. This created a fatal gap in the emperor's formation. Romanos fought valiantly, but he was soon surrounded, his guard overwhelmed, and the emperor himself was taken captive. The news of an emperor of Byzantium becoming a prisoner sent a shock through the Christian world. The defeat itself was catastrophic, but what followed was far worse for the empire. Emperor Romanos was eventually released after agreeing to significant concessions, but his return to Constantinople was met not with gratitude but with a political coup. His rivals seized power, deposed him, and the empire plunged into a bitter civil war just when unity was most desperately needed. This internal chaos left the empire's borders utterly exposed. The disciplined Byzantine armies that had guarded the frontiers melted away, pulled back to support competing claimants to the throne. Into this power vacuum flowed the Turkic clans, not as a single invading force, but in a gradual, sustained migration. They found the rich pastorallands of Anatolia, the very heartland of the Byzantine Empire, virtually undefended. Within a generation, they had settled across the plateau, establishing their own political entity, the Sultanate of Rum. This was the true, lasting impact of Manzikert. It was not merely a lost battle, but the event that unlocked Anatolia for a new people. The demographic and cultural character of the region, which had been Greek and Christian for over a millennium, began a profound and permanent transformation. The loss of this vital territory, with its resources and its manpower, crippled the Byzantine Empire, reducing it from a Mediterranean superpower to a beleaguered state clinging to its coasts. The sudden Seljuk presence so close to Constantinople also sent a wave of alarm through Western Europe, directly inspiring the Pope's call for the First Crusade, an effort to reclaim the lost eastern lands. In this way, the clash at Manzikert set in motion a chain of events that would not only redraw the map of Asia Minor, but would also forge a new and tumultuous relationship between East and West, a relationship whose consequences are still felt in the modern world. The Mongol war machine, having unified the steppes, now turned its gaze toward the settled civilizations to the west. Its first great confrontation beyond China was with the powerful Khwarazmian Empire, a state that controlled the vital arteries of the Silk Road across Central Asia. The spark for this monumental conflict was an act of profound provocation. The Khwarazmian Shah Muhammad II made the fateful decision to execute a group of Mongol envoys and merchants, an act that Genghis Khan viewed not just as an insult but as a declaration of war. In response, the Mongol leader mobilized his entire force, a highly disciplined army organized in decimal units, moving with a coordination that their opponents could scarcely comprehend. Their campaign against Khwarazm was a striking demonstration of a new kind of warfare, one aimed not at conquest alone, but at the complete dissolution of the enemy's will and capacity to exist. The Mongol strategy was systematic and overwhelming. They avoided large, set-piece battles whenever possible, instead isolating and surrounding the empire's great fortified cities one by one. They used local captives as a resource, forcing them to march ahead of their own troops during assaults, a difficult tactic that strained the morale of the defenders. The great centers of Islamic learning and commerce, Bukhara and Samarkand, fell in quick succession. Historical accounts describe a period of immense hardship for the urban populations, with many community members facing displacement and the destruction of their homes. The Mongols were methodical in their work, dismantling the very foundations of Khwarazmian power. Irrigation canals that had sustained agriculture for centuries were broken, and the skilled artisans of the cities were gathered up and sent east to serve the Mongol court. This was more than a military defeat. It was the deliberate erasure of a state. The political structure of the Khwarazmian Empire was entirely dissolved, its ruling family scattered and pursued to distant lands. The consequences of this transformation rippled across the globe. With the Khwarazmian barrier removed, the path was now open for Mongol armies to pour into Persia, the Caucasus, and toward the distant frontiers of Eastern Europe. The stability of the Silk Road was shattered, its trade routes disrupted and then slowly rebuilt under new, Mongol-controlled systems that would later become the Pax Mongolica. Perhaps one of the most significant unintended results was the great exodus of refugees. Scholars, soldiers, and mystics fled west, carrying with them the advanced knowledge and cultural traditions of Central Asia, seeding new ideas and influences across the Muslim world from India to Anatolia. The disappearance of the Khwarazmian Empire was a pivotal moment that proved no power, no matter how wealthy or seemingly secure, was safe from the storm that had gathered on the steppes. The fragmentation of Genghis Khan's empire did not bring peace, but rather redirected its immense energy into new, competing channels. Among the four successor states, the Chagatai Khanate found itself occupying a critical and contested space, the historic heartland of Central Asia known as Transoxiana. This was a land of fabled cities like Samarkand and Bukhara, hubs of the Silk Road whose control meant wealth, prestige, and a legitimate claim to the Mongol legacy. Yet for the Chagatai Khans, this prize remained perpetually out of reach, locked behind a web of internal and external challenges. Their history is one of relentless, grinding conflict, a story not of unified expansion but of a power constantly at war with itself and its neighbors. The Khanate was deeply divided between the traditional Mongol steppe nomads who favored the old ways and the settled Muslim populations of the cities who sought stability and Islamic governance. This internal friction often erupted into civil war, with rival factions supporting different claimants to the throne, ensuring that no single leader could consolidate power for long. Externally, the Chagatai were pressed on all sides. To the west, their Mongol cousins in the Ilkhanate contested them for control of the rich Iranian plateau. To the south, they repeatedly tested the defenses of the Delhi Sultanate, launching expeditions through the mountain passes into the plains of India. These movements were not full-scale invasions aimed at permanent conquest, but rather massive, organized campaigns for resources. The Chagatai cavalry would descend upon the wealthy northern cities of the Sultanate, challenging the resolve and resources of the sultans in Delhi. The most famous of these expeditions was led by a Turco-Mongol commander named Timur, who would later build his own empire from the foundations of the Chagatai state. This constant state of rivalry, while preventing the rise of a single stable power in Central Asia, had an unintended consequence. It turned the region into a vast corridor for the movement of armies, but also for the technologies and cultures they carried. Military innovations in strategy and cavalry tactics circulated freely among the competing states. Artists, scholars, and artisans displaced by shifting allegiances found new patrons in rival courts. The very instability that defined the Chagatai Khanate ultimately cultivated the conditions for a new world shaker to emerge. From this dynamic, competitive landscape, a figure would rise who understood how to harness its fractured power, a leader who would unite its diverse tribes and direct their combined force toward campaigns that would reshape the map from Delhi to Anatolia. Yet this web of conflict stretched even further, ensnaring the Mongols themselves in a painful family feud. From their new power base in Persia, the Ilkhanate found themselves in a precarious position, caught between two formidable and hostile fronts. To their west stood the Mamluk Sultanate, the very power that had halted the Mongol advance at Ain Jalut, a disciplined military state that now challenged their influence in Syria and the Levant. To their north, across the rugged mountains of the Caucasus, lay the domain of their cousins, the Golden Horde. This was not a simple border dispute. It was a deep schism within the Mongol world, a fracture that would consume generations and immense resources. The conflict with the Golden Horde was particularly complex, rooted in a disagreement over the rich pasture-lands of Azerbaijan. Both Khanates saw this territory as essential for their cavalry and their wealth, leading to a series of intense campaigns through the mountain passes. These were not mere skirmishes, but full-scale invasions where Mongol fought against Mongol, a civil war on a continental scale. The ideological dimension deepened the rift over time. The Ilkhans, initially open to various faiths, gradually embraced Islam, integrating themselves into the political and religious fabric of the Middle East. The Golden Horde, meanwhile, formed strategic and sometimes marital alliances with Christian powers like the Byzantine Empire and even the Mamluk Sultanate itself, creating a remarkable geopolitical triangle. This meant the Ilkhanate was often fighting a two-front war against enemies who supported each other, a strategic challenge that drained their treasury and stretched their armies thin. The constant campaigning in both the Caucasus and the Syrian deserts prevented any single Mongol state from achieving dominance. This internal division was the empire's greatest weakness. The endless conflict exhausted all participants, preventing the reunification of Genghis Khan's legacy and ensuring that the vast Mongol Empire would remain fractured. In the power vacuum left by their stalemate, new forces began to gather strength on the peripheries, including ambitious Turkic tribes and regional leaders, waiting for their moment to redraw the map of Western Asia once more. From the fractured chaos of the Chagatai Khanate, a storm gathered and took a name, Timur the Lame. This Turco-Mongol chieftain did not merely conquer, he engineered a machine of war designed to overwhelm empires through a powerful combination of military genius and psychological pressure. His campaigns were a whirlwind of relentless movement, but their success was built on a foundation of meticulous planning. He perfected the use of massive siege engines, constructing towering catapults and movable towers that could reduce the strongest city walls to rubble. Yet his most enduring legacy was a tool of immense symbolic force. The construction of vast pyramids from personal objects and tokens left outside conquered cities as a final, silent message to any who might consider resistance. This was not random action, but a calculated strategy to shape the will of entire populations before his armies even arrived, making subsequent surrenders faster and less costly for his own forces. The list of powers he reshaped is staggering. He shattered the Golden Horde so completely that its influence over the Russian principalities waned, creating an opportunity for Moscow to begin its own slow rise. He turned his attention to the Delhi Sultanate, defeating its war elephants and capturing its capital, an event that so weakened the ruling dynasty it paved the way for new powers to eventually emerge across the Indian subcontinent. Perhaps his most pivotal intervention came at the dawn of the 15th century when he confronted the rising Ottoman Empire. At the Battle of Ankara in 1402, his forces captured the ambitious Ottoman Sultan, Bayezid I, throwing their empire into a period of internal conflict just as it was poised to expand deeper into Europe. Timur's own empire, built so rapidly on strategic pressure and brilliant generalship, did not long survive his passing, but that was almost the point. His true, lasting impact was not in the state he built, but in the political openings he created. By systematically reshaping or displacing every major power from Eastern Europe to the gates of India, he cleared the landscape for new beginnings. From this period of transition, new trajectories for Russian, Indian, and Middle Eastern history could begin, their courses forever altered by the whirlwind that was Tamerlane. But in the shadow of Tamerlane's whirlwind, a more permanent transformation was taking root across northern India. The Delhi Sultanate was not a single dynasty, but a succession of Turkic and Afghan rulers, each building upon the foundations of the last to forge a centralized state of unprecedented scale. Their power rested on two revolutionary pillars. The first was a highly mobile, heavily armored cavalry, a force that could move with speed across the northern plains, outmaneuvering the traditional armies of the region. The second was the Mamluk system itself, a structure of soldiers loyal not to a tribe or a caste, but directly to the Sultan. This created a disciplined, professional corps that could be deployed with great effect. Their ambition was to bring the vast wealth and fragmented kingdoms of the subcontinent under one administrative umbrella, an effort that inevitably led them toward the rugged, fortress-studded lands of the Rajputs. The Rajputs were not a single kingdom but a confederation of warrior clans bound by a shared code of honor and martial valor. They had turned the arid hills and forests of Rajasthan into a natural fortress, their castles perched on seemingly inaccessible peaks, their walls a declaration of independence. When the Sultanate's armies marched south, they were not just facing another army, they were confronting an entire culture built around the defense of the homeland. The resulting conflicts were among the most challenging of the medieval era. A Sultanate force, for all its cavalry and siege engines, would find itself stretched thin, laying long and difficult sieges to castles like Chitta and Ranthambore, where the defenders were prepared to endure immense hardship. The Rajputs, masters of guerrilla tactics from their mountain strongholds, would launch lightning raids on supply lines, turning the Sultanate's own need for forage and water into a strategic challenge. These were wars of endurance that could last for years, a grinding process of advance and setback that tested the resources and will of both sides. Yet out of this prolonged and difficult contact came an unexpected synthesis. Rajput chiefs, recognizing the shifting political landscape, began to adopt aspects of Turkic military technology, integrating heavier cavalry and new siegecraft into their own armies. The sultans, in turn, learned that they could not govern this vast land by force alone. They began to incorporate Rajput nobility into their administrative machinery, granting them lands and titles in exchange for loyalty and military service. This pragmatic alliance reshaped the demographic and cultural fabric of northern India. The spread of Islamic administrative practices, architecture, and scholarship created new urban centers, while the enduring traditions of the Rajputs continued to define the rural heartland. This complex fusion of Turkic and Indian traditions, born from generations of conflict and cooperation, created a unique Indo-Islamic civilization. It was this very synthesis that laid the groundwork for the political structures, the artistic achievements, and the military organization that would later be inherited and expanded by the Moguls, setting a pattern for Indian governance that would endure for centuries. South of the war-torn plains of the north, a different kind of kingdom was rising from the rocky landscape of the Deccan. The Vijayanagara Empire emerged not merely as a Hindu state, but as a grand political and cultural counterweight to the expanding influence of the Delhi Sultanate. Its founders, Harihara and Bukka, envisioned a realm that could unite the diverse peoples of the south under a single banner, creating a bastion of stability and immense wealth. Their capital city was a marvel of its age, a sprawling metropolis fed by sophisticated aqueducts and reservoirs. Its grand temples and bustling markets a testament to its role as the undisputed master of South India's fortune. For over 2 centuries, Vijayanagara's power flowed from its shrewd control of the peninsula's most valuable assets. It commanded the rich spice gardens of the Malabar coast, the diamond mines of its interior, and the bustling ports that connected India to the maritime networks of Southeast Asia and the Arab world. This economic dominance inevitably drew the attention of its northern neighbors, setting the stage for a confrontation that was less about faith and more about the irresistible pull of commercial supremacy. The true struggle was for the gateways to the Indian Ocean and for the right to guide the flow of gems, pepper, and textiles that the wider world so desperately desired. This long-simmering rivalry reached its climax on a dusty field at Talikota in 1565. The Vijayanagara Emperor, Aliya Rama Raya, led a massive and confident army to meet a combined force from the Deccan Sultanates, a coalition of rival kingdoms that had temporarily set aside their own differences to face their common foe. The battle began with the thunderous charge of Vijayanagara's forces, but the tide turned through a mixture of tactical misfortune and shifting loyalties. 2 commanders in the Vijayanagara service, their allegiance swayed by the opposing coalition, chose a pivotal moment to switch sides. This turn of events shattered the imperial formation from within, creating confusion at the very heart of the army. The aged Emperor Rama Raya was captured during the fray, and the leader of the opposing forces made a decisive choice. With their commander lost, the will of the Vijayanagara army broke. The coalition forces did not stop at the battlefield. They pursued the retreating soldiers all the way back to the magnificent capital city. What followed was not a simple military occupation, but a systematic dismantling of the empire's symbolic heart. The victorious armies emptied the city's legendary treasuries, and over the following months, the grand urban center, with its intricate temples and bustling bazaars, was gradually abandoned. The vital irrigation systems that sustained its population fell into disrepair, and the city itself slowly returned to the embrace of the surrounding landscape. The transition of Vijayanagara was a moment that echoed across the subcontinent. It reshaped the political unity of the South, leading to a rapid fragmentation into smaller, competing states. This shift in power allowed the Deccan Sultanates to enter a golden age of their own. their courts in Bijapur and Golconda becoming celebrated centers of art and architecture. The economic consequences were just as profound. With the central authority gone, the carefully managed trade routes fractured, redirecting wealth and influence and permanently altering the balance of power in India. The golden age of the South had passed, its brilliant capital a place of memory, a powerful reminder of how quickly the landscape of an entire region can be redrawn by the outcome of a single day's conflict. The northern gates of India were about to be thrown open by a force from the highlands of Afghanistan. Mahmud of Ghazni, a ruler of Turkic origin, launched not one but 17 major expeditions into the rich plains of the subcontinent. His motivations were a complex mixture of worldly ambition and spiritual purpose, driven by a desire for the legendary wealth of Hindu temples and a calling to extend the frontiers of his faith. His army moved with a speed and coordination that the regional kingdoms struggled to counter. At its core were highly mobile units of horse archers, warriors who could unleash a storm of arrows while maneuvering with breathtaking agility, constantly encircling and confusing larger, slower-moving infantry forces. But Mahmud also understood the power of spectacle and shock. He integrated war elephants into his military, these towering creatures serving as mobile archery platforms and living battering rams that could shatter enemy formations and break the will of defending troops. The primary obstacle in his path was the Hindu Songhai kingdom, a power that had long guarded the northwestern passes. Through a series of relentless campaigns, Mahmud systematically dismantled their authority, capturing their fortified cities and claiming their royal treasuries. His most famous raids targeted the incredibly wealthy temple complexes at Somnath and Mathura, sites that functioned as both spiritual centers and vast storehouses of gold, jewels, and art accumulated over centuries. The wealth he carried back to Ghazni transformed his capital into a brilliant center of Persian culture and art, funding an era of architectural and scholarly flourishing. While Mahmud's empire did not seek to directly administer the lands he entered, his actions had a seismic impact. He reshaped the political order of northwestern India, demonstrating the vulnerability of its established kingdoms and clearing a path for more permanent forms of influence. That more enduring wave arrived with the Ghurids. Where Mahmud had been a raider on an imperial scale, Muhammad of Ghor was a builder of empires. He learned from the Ghaznavid model but possessed a far greater ambition for territorial control. His forces, also built around a core of Turkic slave soldiers and cavalry, were designed not just for plunder but for conquest and occupation. The pivotal moment came at the Second Battle of Tarain in 1192. There, his disciplined cavalry faced the vast but less mobile army of the Rajput ruler Prithviraj Chauhan. The Ghurid strategy was a masterclass in tactical patience and feigned retreat. They lured the Rajput chargers out of position, stretched their lines, and then counter-attacked with devastating force, securing a victory that broke the power of the last major Hindu kingdom, blocking their path to Delhi. This was the true turning point. With the heartland of North India now open, Muhammad of Ghor's trusted commander, Qutb ad-Din Aibak, established his headquarters at Delhi, founding what would become the Delhi Sultanate. This was not a temporary camp but the foundation of a new political order. The Ghurid conquests initiated a profound and lasting demographic and cultural shift. They established the first significant Muslim political entities to rule over a largely Hindu population, drawing a new religious and political frontier across the subcontinent. Military elites, administrators, scholars, and artisans from Persia and Central Asia began to settle in the new urban centers of the north. This influx brought new architectural styles, administrative practices, and linguistic influences that would gradually blend with local traditions over the coming centuries. The Ghaznavid lightning and the Ghurid consolidation together initiated a process of transformation so deep that it would define the very identity of the Indian subcontinent for the next 1,000 years, setting the stage for the epic struggles and syntheses that were still to come. While the sultans and rajas fought over the Indian heartland, a different kind of empire was charting its destiny on the waves. The Srivijaya Empire ruled not from a vast inland capital, but from a network of river ports on Sumatra, its authority measured in the number of ships that obeyed its command. This was a thalassocracy, a seaborne dominion whose power was projected entirely through its mastery of the ocean. Its most prized possession was not a province, but a narrow passage of water, the Strait of Malacca. For any vessel sailing between the markets of China and the Spice Islands of the East Indies, this strait was the only practical route, a geographical bottleneck that Srivijaya transformed into the world's most lucrative toll booth. Their powerful navy, a fleet of swift and formidable vessels, patrolled these waters, ensuring that every ship carrying cinnamon, cloves, and pepper paid a tribute for safe passage. This control was not given, it was constantly defended. Rival kingdoms understood that whoever held Malacca held the key to unimaginable wealth. From the island of Java, the Mataram kingdom launched its own naval expeditions, challenging Srivijaya's claim to the strait in a series of clashes where victory was decided by ramming tactics and boarding actions. These were difficult and hard-fought engagements for control of the sea lanes, a struggle that stretched the resources of both powers, but the greatest challenge would come from across the Bay of Bengal. The Chola Empire of South India, a naval superpower in its own right, saw Srivijaya not as a partner, but as an obstacle to their own direct access to the Chinese market. In a daring move, the Chola king Rajendra I dispatched a massive invasion fleet. This was not a raid for plunder, but a calculated strike against the very heart of Srivijaya's power. The Chola fleet targeted and secured the key port cities, a demonstration of force that temporarily disrupted the Sumatran Empire's grip on the strait. This confrontation between two maritime giants underscored just how high the stakes were. Srivijaya's resilience allowed it to eventually re-establish its influence, but the challenge had been profound. Beyond commerce, this naval empire became a great conduit for culture. As merchant ships moved, so did monks and sacred texts. Srivijaya transformed into a major center for Buddhist learning, attracting scholars from as far away as China and nurturing a unique fusion of local beliefs and Mahayana teachings. Its royal court became a patron of grand monastic universities, making it a spiritual beacon whose light shone across the seas. This model of power, built on controlling strategic choke points rather than occupying vast territories, created a new blueprint for empire in Southeast Asia. It proved that sovereignty could be measured in control of trade winds and shipping lanes, a lesson that would define the region's geopolitical importance for 1,000 years, drawing the attention of every subsequent power that sought to command the riches of the East. Deep within the Cambodian jungle, the Khmer Empire channeled its great wealth into a powerful force of stone and soldier. At its zenith, this was a civilization that could reshape the landscape itself, turning its capital of Angkor into one of the largest pre-industrial cities on Earth. The empire's reach was extended through immense campaigns, made possible by the agricultural surplus from sophisticated water management that sustained a vast population. This reservoir of human energy allowed the Khmer kings to assemble enormous infantry formations, supported by the ground-shaking presence of war elephants. These creatures were not just symbols of royalty, they were the heavy units of their time, used to disrupt opposing lines and create a deep psychological impact. The Khmer military also excelled in advanced siege techniques, building massive earthen ramps to ascend fortress walls and operating large-scale catapults to overcome defenses. This impressive system was directed outward toward two primary fronts. To the east, the empire engaged in a long and complex rivalry with the Cham Empire, a maritime power based in what is now Vietnam. Their encounters involved a series of coastal expeditions and territorial movements, a dynamic struggle for regional influence that sometimes saw ceremonial centers affected and capitals change hands for a time. To the west, the Khmer faced a different kind of challenge from the emerging Thai communities, who were gradually moving southward. The Khmer response was to extend their cultural sphere deep into the Chao Phraya River basin, establishing strong outposts and seeking tribute, a policy of growth that brought them into direct contact with these ambitious new groups. The success of these endeavors had a profound cultural effect. As Khmer influence grew, it carried with it a distinctive blend of Hindu and Buddhist traditions, expressed in the magnificent state temples that also served as centers of administrative control. The iconic faces of the Bayon Temple at Angkor Thom are not just a spiritual statement, they are a declaration of the king's ever-present authority, overseeing a realm constructed through determined effort. The resources gathered from connected territories and neighboring societies funded these staggering architectural wonders, from the sprawling urban complex of Angkor itself to the intricate water systems that sustained it. Yet this very growth contained the beginnings of future challenges. The constant activity stretched imperial resources, and the bringing together of diverse communities created administrative complexities. More significantly, the Western movements brought the Khmer into sustained contact with the Thai peoples, who observed and adopted Khmer organizational and political models. The empire's overwhelming influence had, in a sense, guided the very groups who would one day gather strength, shift the direction of cultural exchange, and ultimately help reshape the political landscape of Southeast Asia. While the Khmer built with stone on the mainland, another empire was weaving its influence across 1,000 islands. On the fertile plains of eastern Java, the Majapahit Empire rose to become the dominant power of the archipelago, its story forever defined by a single, powerful vow. The Prime Minister Gajah Mada stood before the royal court and made an extraordinary pledge known as the Palapa Oath. He declared he would not taste any spice, a metaphor for enjoying the comforts of life, until the many islands and kingdoms across the seas were united under Majapahit's banner. This was not a call for simple conquest, but for the creation of a vast political and cultural network, a unified sphere of influence stretching across the entire Indonesian world. To achieve this, Majapahit deployed a masterful combination of hard and soft power. Its powerful navy, a fleet of sturdy outrigger vessels, patrolled the sea lanes, demonstrating the empire's reach and its ability to project force to distant shores like Sumatra and Bali. Yet this naval strength was often a backdrop for sophisticated diplomacy. Majapahit frequently arranged strategic marriages between its royal family and the ruling houses of neighboring kingdoms, weaving a web of kinship and obligation that peacefully integrated new territories into its orbit. Local rulers were often allowed to remain in power so long as they acknowledged the supremacy of the Majapahit king and contributed to the empire's prosperity. This system of suzerainty created the closest equivalent to a unified Indonesia the world would see for centuries, a maritime realm whose influence touched places as far off as the coasts of New Guinea. The legacy of this ambitious state-building endures profoundly. The Majapahit Empire helped standardize and spread a common legal and administrative culture, and its court language became a prestigious lingua franca, planting the early seeds for the modern Indonesian language. Its epic poetry, like the Nagarakretagama, provides a window into a world of complex international relations, detailing diplomatic missions from China, Siam, and even parts of India. This was not an isolated jungle kingdom, but a pivotal player in a connected medieval world. The Majapahit achievement proves that the islands of Southeast Asia were not a scattered collection of villages, but a vibrant theater for some of the most ambitious and successful political projects of the Middle Ages, a legacy of unity that still whispers through the region's culture today. The audacity of the Chola campaign remains breathtaking even today. From their heartland in Tamil Nadu, the Chola kings gazed across the Bay of Bengal and saw not an impassable barrier, but a highway for their ambition. Under the command of Rajendra Chola I, a massive fleet was assembled, a force of specialized warships and troop transports designed to cross open ocean. This was no mere pirate raid, it was a calculated imperial strike aimed at the very core of Srivijaya's power. The motivation was a complex tapestry of economics, pride, and strategic foresight. At its most practical level, the Chola rulers sought to protect the powerful Tamil merchant guilds, whose lucrative trade with China was being constrained by Srivijayan control over the Strait of Malacca. These guilds were not just traders, they were pillars of the Chola economy, and their interests were state interests. Beyond commerce, there was the irresistible pull of prestige. To bring the treasures of a rival empire home was the ultimate demonstration of a king's divine favor and unmatched power, a story to be carved in stone for generations. The campaign itself was a masterpiece of naval logistics. The Chola fleet navigated the treacherous waters of the Bay of Bengal, making landfall not on the Indian coast, but over 1,000 miles away on the shores of Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula. Their targets were the great Srivijayan port cities, the very nodes of the maritime network. Historical accounts describe a period of significant change for these urban centers, with their markets and administrative districts influenced by the Chola presence. The success of these expeditions sent a powerful message through the entire Indian Ocean trading system. For a brief but pivotal period, the balance of power shifted. The Cholas had demonstrated that no maritime power, no matter how entrenched, was safe from a determined challenger. They temporarily guided the flow of commerce along the sea lanes, redirecting the movement of spices and silks and proving that the medieval world was far more interconnected than we often assume. A conflict born from local commercial rivalry in South India could send ripples that changed the economy of Southeast Asia and altered diplomatic calculations as far away as the Song dynasty in China. The Chola naval expeditions stand as a powerful testament to the fact that in the medieval era, the greatest empires were those who could command not only the land, but the sea itself. The splendor of the Tang dynasty masked a critical weakness, a reliance on ambitious frontier generals to guard its vast borders. One such commander, a man of Sogdian and Turkic origins named Lushan, commanded the empire's finest armies in the north. He had won the personal favor of the emperor himself, but when a rival gained influence at court, Lushan's loyalty shifted toward a desire for greater authority. In the year 755, he mobilized his veterans and declared a new dynasty, plunging the heart of China into a conflict of immense scale. This was not an invasion from the steppes, but a civil war that would reshape the empire from within. The scale of the upheaval is difficult to fully grasp. For years, the fighting moved back and forth across the North China Plain, with pivotal cities like Luoyang and Chang'an, the magnificent capital, changing hands many times. Records from the era describe a period of profound difficulty for the people, with communities uprooted and the intricate systems that supported daily life falling into disrepair. The conflict lasted for nearly a decade, and by its end, the vibrant urban centers that had defined the Tang Golden Age were greatly diminished. The rebellion's most lasting impact was political. To survive, the Tang court was compelled to grant significant autonomy to regional military governors, who commanded their own troops and collected their own taxes. The central government's authority never fully recovered. This internal shift had immediate external consequences. With the empire's best armies occupied by internal strife, the Tang could no longer maintain its distant territories in Central Asia. The great outposts that had projected influence along the Silk Road were gradually left behind, weakening a cultural and economic link that had flourished for centuries. This withdrawal created a power vacuum across Inner Asia, one that was quickly filled by the expanding Tibetan Empire, which moved into the western regions, and by various confederations of steppe peoples who re-established their presence. The An Lushan Rebellion did not just end a golden age, it permanently altered the political unity of Tang China. It redirected the flow of power from a centralized, cosmopolitan empire to a patchwork of semi-independent military zones, a model that would influence Chinese governance for centuries. The map of East Asia was fundamentally remade, not by a foreign conqueror, but by a rebellion that showed no empire, no matter how brilliant, is immune to the challenges emerging from within its own structure. For generations, the mountain kingdom of Goguryeo stood as an unyielding fortress against the might of China. Perched on the rugged highlands of northern Korea and Manchuria, its people had mastered the art of defending their homeland, turning sheer cliffs and narrow passes into instruments of war. When the newly established Tang dynasty set its sights on expansion, it saw Goguryeo not as a neighbor, but as an obstacle to be removed. What followed was one of the most grueling and consequential struggles of the medieval era, a series of invasions that would test the limits of both empires. The genius of Goguryeo's defense lay in its strategic geography and its leadership. The kingdom constructed an incredible network of mountain fortresses, citadels built directly into the rock faces, their walls following the natural contours of the terrain. Supplying these remote strongholds was a monumental effort, but it meant that any invading Tang army would face a slow and difficult campaign of attrition, scaling heights under a constant rain of arrows and rocks. For decades, this system held. Then came a leader of almost mythical stature, the General Yon Gisamun. He was a master of asymmetrical warfare, understanding that he could not defeat the Tang in open battle on the plains. Instead, he used the land itself as his primary weapon. He would allow the massive Chinese armies to advance deep into Goguryeo territory, stretching their supply lines to the breaking point. Then, as the seasons turned and the invaders grew weary and cold, his mobile forces would strike from their mountain redoubts, cutting off retreat and harrying the Tang until they were forced into a disastrous withdrawal. The passing of this legendary general, however, created a power vacuum the Tang were quick to exploit. Internal disagreements fractured the Goguryeo leadership, and the Tang formed a pivotal alliance with the Silla kingdom in the southern part of the peninsula. Silla saw an opportunity to tip the balance of power in its favor, providing the Tang with a secure base of operations and crucial intelligence. The final campaign was a pincer movement of overwhelming force. While Tang armies pressed from the north, Silla forces advanced from the south, systematically isolating and overwhelming the great Goguryeo fortresses one by one. The transition of the capital, Pyongyang, marked not just the end of a kingdom, but the closing of an entire historical era, the Age of the Three Kingdoms. The aftermath reshaped the Korean world. The Tang intended to absorb the entire peninsula, but their Silla allies had other plans. Through a combination of diplomatic pressure and military readiness, Silla persuaded the Tang to withdraw south of the Tidong River, effectively unifying the majority of the Korean people under a single rule for the first time. This hard-won unity came with a condition, a formal tributary relationship with the Tang court. The Korean king acknowledged the Chinese emperor as the senior partner in a cultural and diplomatic exchange, a system that would define East Asian international relations for 1,000 years. This new arrangement ensured peace and cultural exchange, with Korea adopting Chinese writing, legal codes, and Confucian ideals, while still maintaining its own distinct political identity. The epic conflict between Goguryeo and Tang, therefore, forged the very idea of a unified Korea, establishing the ethnic and political boundaries that would endure for centuries and setting a pattern of diplomacy between the peninsula and the mainland that continues to echo through history. The Song dynasty had perfected an art of elegant statecraft and cultural brilliance, but it now faced a determined force from the northern plains. Genghis Khan first tested the defenses of the weakening Jin dynasty to the north, a long and difficult effort that taught his armies the complexities of confronting great Chinese cities. It was his grandson, Kublai Khan, who would commit fully to the ultimate prize, the rich and populous lands of the southern Song. This was not a swift cavalry raid, but a monumental project of expansion, a multi-decade campaign that required the Mongols to adapt completely. They built their own powerful navy to challenge the formidable Song fleet on the Yangtze River, and they employed advanced siege engines designed by Persian and Chinese engineers to overcome massive city walls. The final Song resistance was deeply committed, culminating in the naval battle of Yemen in 1279, where the last loyalists made their stand. The outcome marked a profound turning point in world history. For the first time, the entire Chinese heartland was governed by a power originating entirely from beyond its traditional frontiers. Kublai Khan declared himself Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty and integrating this ancient civilization into the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever known. He made a strategic decision that would influence China for centuries to come, moving the primary capital from the southern centers of Chinese culture to his new city in the north, Dadu, the city we now know as Beijing. This shift of the political center of gravity was a deliberate move to better manage his vast Eurasian domains. Yuan rule was a study in contrasts. The Mongols instituted a structured ethnic hierarchy, placing their own people at the top and often limiting the roles of the Han Chinese scholarly class in the highest levels of government. Yet simultaneously, they fostered an era of incredible cultural and technological exchange. Under the Pax Mongolica, the Silk Road thrived as never before. Merchants, missionaries, and adventurers like Marco Polo traveled freely from Europe to the Chinese court, carrying with them ideas, inventions, and observations that would reshape the worldview of entire continents. Chinese innovations such as gunpowder, paper money, and printing began their journey west, while Persian astronomical knowledge and Islamic medical texts found a receptive audience in the East. This period of external administration, while challenging for the traditional elite, connected China into a globalizing medieval world, altering its technological path and its understanding of its own place on the map. The Yuan dynasty legacy is a complex one, a century of outside leadership that left a lasting mark on Chinese administration, urban planning, and its future relationship with the northern steppes, showing that even the most established civilizations can be reshaped by the currents of global change. Two massive invasion fleets appeared on the horizon, an armada unlike anything Japan had ever seen. The samurai of the Kamakura shogunate watched from their coastal defenses as hundreds of Yuan ships approached, carrying tens of thousands of Mongol, Chinese, and Korean troops. This was the war machine of Kublai Khan, fresh from its victory over the southern Song, and it was now directed at their shores, The first assault in 1274 was a stark introduction to a new kind of warfare. The samurai, accustomed to ritualized single combat, faced an enemy that fought in disciplined, coordinated units. The Mongol forces used thunder crash bombs, early explosive devices, and fired arrows in mass volleys, creating great confusion among the defending warriors. Despite fierce resistance, the initial landing forced the Japanese to fall back. Yet the invasion did not progress as planned. After a day of hard fighting, a sudden and violent storm struck the coast, damaging a significant portion of the Yuan fleet. The Mongol commanders, their forces now vulnerable and overextended, made the decision to withdraw. Japan had been spared, but only for a time. The shogunate knew this was a reprieve, not a victory. In the 7 years that followed, they undertook a monumental effort to fortify the entire coastline of western Japan. They constructed a vast stone wall along the shore of Hakata Bay, a barrier designed to prevent future landings and to give their samurai a stable platform from which to defend. Every warrior was put on high alert, and a system of coastal watchtowers was established to provide early warning. The entire society was mobilized for a defense that felt inevitable. When the second, even larger fleet arrived in 1281, the Japanese were ready. This time, the samurai used their new defensive works to their advantage, launching small, aggressive boat attacks against the invading fleet before it could properly disembark its massive army. For nearly 2 months, a desperate stalemate held along the coast, with the samurai containing the vast Yuan force to its beachheads. Then, another, far more powerful typhoon roared across the sea. This storm was catastrophic for the invasion force, smashing the tightly packed ships against each other and the shore. A vast number of vessels were lost, and with them, the Mongol ambition to conquer Japan. The nation celebrated the kamikaze, the divine winds, as a clear sign of heavenly protection. Yet the real-world consequences of this deliverance were deeply complex. The shogunate had successfully defended the realm, but the cost was ruinous. They had exhausted their treasury to build the coastal defenses and had promised rewards and land to the samurai who had fought so valiantly. With no new territories conquered, there was no new land to distribute. This financial strain created deep-seated resentment among the warrior class, planting the seeds for future political strife that would ultimately contribute to the shogunate's decline a century later. The experience of facing an existential threat from the continent forged a powerful and enduring national story, one that fostered a sense of unique identity and divine favor. This belief would profoundly influence Japan's foreign policy for centuries, encouraging a turn inward and a cautious, often isolated, stance toward the outside world. The storms had saved the islands, but they also set them on a solitary course, forever altering their relationship with the vast continent across the water. The alliance that had shattered Goguryeo was a partnership of pure convenience, and its collapse was inevitable. With their common goals achieved, Silla and the Tang dynasty now faced each other across a changed peninsula, their former cooperation replaced by a new reality. The Tang emperor had not sent his armies to create an independent Korean power, but to bring the entire region under imperial administration. Silla, having just helped topple one giant, now found itself confronting another. The first clear signal of this new tension was the Battle of Hwangsanbeol. There, the brilliant Silla general Kim Yu-sin confronted a large force loyal to the old Beach Kingdom, a restoration army determined to reclaim its sovereignty. Outnumbered and facing a determined adversary, Kim Yu-sin employed a masterful act of psychological strategy. He sent a simple gift to the opposing commander, a symbol of their shared past and a subtle message about the changing tide. This gesture, combined with a perfectly timed cavalry charge, broke the will of the beach forces and secured the field for Silla. This victory was crucial, but it was only the prelude to the true challenge, a contest for the future of the peninsula. The Silla-Tang War that followed was a masterclass in asymmetric conflict. Silla could not hope to defeat the massive Tang armies in open battle. Instead, they turned to the land itself, waging a relentless campaign from their mountain strongholds. They disrupted supply lines, challenged occupying forces, and made the cost of holding Korean territory increasingly difficult for the Tang. At the same time, Silla's diplomats were tirelessly at work, negotiating and stalling, all while seeking to use the broader pressures the Tang faced across their vast frontiers. This combined approach of persistent pressure and diplomatic skill worked. Worn down and overextended, the Tang eventually agreed to a settlement. They withdrew their forces south of the Taedong River, formally recognizing Silla's authority over a unified Korean state. This was not a complete military victory, but a brilliant political achievement. Silla acknowledged the Tang emperor as its cultural elder within the tributary system, sending regular embassies and gifts to the Chinese court. In return, the Tang granted the Korean king full autonomy to govern his own people. This careful balance defined a new relationship between the peninsula and the mainland, one that would endure for 1,000 years. The result was the unified Silla period, a golden age where Korean culture, freed from the constant drumbeat of war, flourished in art, science, and Buddhist scholarship. The capital at Gyeongju became a city of breathtaking pagodas and serene gardens, a testament to a peace hard-won through strategic wisdom and a deep commitment to self-determination. This chapter did more than establish a border. It forged a lasting model of how a smaller kingdom could navigate the presence of a continental empire, securing its own identity while maintaining a stable and respectful connection to the wider world. From the high plateaus of the roof of the world, an empire looked down upon the ancient trade routes of the Silk Road. The Tibetan Empire, often missing from our maps of medieval power, emerged as a formidable third force between the glittering courts of Tang China and the expanding domains of the Abbasid Caliphate. This was not an isolated mountain kingdom, but a highly organized state with a sophisticated military and grand imperial ambitions. Their power flowed from a unique fusion of martial strength and spiritual purpose, creating a culture where the king was both a divine figure and a commander-in-chief. Their strategic position gave them a commanding view of the Tarim Basin, a vital corridor of oasis cities that served as the crossroads of Eurasia. Control of this basin meant influence over the flow of silk, ideas, and wealth between East and West, a prize the Tibetans were determined to claim as their own. Their campaigns into this region were persistent, a series of carefully planned maneuvers to establish their presence and secure the cooperation of the local populations. They did not act alone. In a masterstroke of practical diplomacy, the Tibetan emperors formed a pivotal alliance with the Turkic Aigha Khaganate, a partnership that combined Tibetan high-altitude endurance with Aigha mobility, creating a coordinated approach that challenged Tang positions from multiple directions. This combined pressure reached its dramatic climax in the year 763. A powerful Tibetan cavalry force, moving with unexpected speed, descended from the mountains and advanced deep into the Chinese heartland. They reached the magnificent capital city of Chang'an, leading the Tang emperor to depart from his own palace. For a brief but symbolic 15 days, the Tibetan standard flew over one of the greatest cities on earth, a clear demonstration that no power was beyond the reach of the Highland armies. The presence was short, yet its symbolic impact was profound, reshaping perceptions of Tang authority. Beyond military achievements, the Tibetan Empire became a remarkable cultural crossroads. Its scholars synthesized laws and administrative practices drawn from Indian, Chinese, and Central Asian models. Its artisans blended artistic styles, creating a unique aesthetic that would come to define Himalayan art for centuries. Most significantly, the empire became the primary conduit for the flow of Buddhism from India into the highlands, a spiritual transmission that would eventually transform the entire region's identity. For 2 centuries, this empire acted as the crucial balancing power in Inner Asia, its influence ensuring that neither China nor the caliphates could dominate the continent completely. Its eventual transition, influenced by internal discussions over royal succession and the growing role of monastic institutions, created a significant shift across the highlands and the Tarim Basin. This change would soon welcome new influences, including the westward movement of the Uyghurs and the gradual spread of Islamic cultures, setting the stage for the next great transformation, the Mongol movements that were still gathering on the horizon. Across the Atlantic, the city of Chala rose from the highlands of central Mexico under a new model of power. The Toltec civilization understood that true authority required more than a strong army. It demanded a story that could unite diverse peoples. They crafted a compelling narrative of divine right, centered on the cult of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. This deity represented a powerful ideal, the union of the sky, embodied by the Quetzal bird, and the earth, symbolized by the serpent. It was a philosophy that championed knowledge, creativity, and the very foundations of civilization itself. By promoting this belief system, the Toltecs provided a shared spiritual language that could resonate across the many city-states of the region, offering a cultural framework for integration. This ideological project was backed by formidable military might. The Toltecs formalized warfare into sacred orders, creating elite brotherhoods of warriors known as the Eagle and Jaguar Knights. These were not merely soldiers, they were initiates in a martial tradition, their animal-inspired regalia symbolizing their connection to the divine and their role as guardians of Toltec order. Their presence was as much a psychological statement as a physical one, representing the overwhelming influence and spiritual sanction of the Chala state. The city itself became a grand hub, its wealth flowing from controlled trade routes that moved precious goods like obsidian, jade, and vibrant feathers across Mesoamerica. This economic network, protected by the warrior orders and sanctified by the priests of Quetzalcoatl, allowed Toltec influence to spread far beyond the reach of its direct governors. Neighboring cities faced a significant choice: align with Chala's cultural and economic system and benefit from the connection, or face the disciplined ranks of its dedicated warriors. The Toltec legacy, however, proved far more durable than their political control, when internal shifts and environmental pressures eventually led to Chala's transformation. The template for empire they had created remained. Centuries later, the Aztecs would look back to the Toltecs as the gold standard of civilization, crafting their own royal lineages to claim descent from Chala's master architects and warriors. The very idea of the city-state, led by a divine king and sustained by organized military brotherhoods, became the blueprint for power in post-classic Mesoamerica. In this way, the Toltecs did not just build an empire, they designed a lasting idea of what an empire should be, an idea that would shape the rise and fall of nations long after their own capital had faded into legend. The vibrant pages of a Mixtec codex unfold like a map of memory, each brushstroke a deliberate record of power carved into the landscape of Oaxaca. Far from simple picture books, these screenfold texts, such as the Codex Zauch-Nuttall, are intricate historical archives chronicling centuries of dynastic ambition and political maneuvering among rival city-states. They document a world where strategic alliances and marital bonds were two sides of the same tool, used to build influence and secure lineages across the sacred valleys. The most legendary figure to emerge from these painted narratives is the ruler known as Eight-Deer Jaguar Claw. His life story, meticulously illustrated across animal skin pages, reads as a masterclass in medieval statecraft. Through a calculated series of engagements with neighboring lords, he systematically expanded his territory, but his genius lay in coupling this expansion with careful diplomacy, arranging marriages with princesses from powerful families to weave a web of loyalty that cemented his control. His eventual success in unifying a vast portion of the Mixtec world was a monumental achievement, yet the codices reveal that this unity was always delicate, a balance of personal alliances and contested lands. The events depicted were often intensely local, focused on controlling specific towns, trade routes, or tributary rights. An encounter might center on a single hilltop shrine, its outcome determining which lineage would guide the community's spiritual and economic life for a generation. These were not chaotic events but carefully orchestrated political acts, their outcomes recorded by scribes to affirm the victor's connection to the land and its people. This rich documentary tradition demonstrates a profound and sophisticated understanding of history and governance. The Mixtec elite used these codices to trace their ancestral lines, affirm their leadership, and navigate the complex relationships that defined their world. They possessed a historical consciousness that meticulously recorded the dates of births, accessions, and significant moments, creating a continuous political narrative stretching back for centuries. In doing so, they left behind a powerful testament, proving that the political landscape of pre-Columbian Mesoamerica was not a blank space, but a deeply textured and constantly shifting mosaic of rival kingdoms, each with its own detailed chronicle of connection, diplomacy, and the enduring pursuit of legacy. The sprawling adobe capital of Chan Chan was a city built from water and will. From this coastal metropolis, the Chimu Empire looked north along the arid Peruvian coastline and saw a landscape of possibility, a succession of river valleys waiting to be woven into a single, powerful kingdom. Their expansion was a masterful blend of influence and ingenuity, driven by an understanding that in a desert, water is the ultimate source of power. They constructed vast, intricate networks of canals and reservoirs, channeling the life-giving flow from the Andes to the sea. This hydraulic engineering was not merely for agriculture, it was a strategic tool of connection. By commanding the water, the Chimu brought together communities, ensuring the cooperation of the valleys they welcomed into their growing domain. Their efforts moved with this same systematic precision, a powerful influence that integrated rather than simply displaced. When they encountered a neighboring culture like the Sikan, renowned for their metallurgy, the Chimu approach was one of careful assimilation. They did not erase the Sikan spiritual traditions, but instead welcomed them into an ever-expanding imperial pantheon. They invited the most skilled Sikan artisans to Chan Chan, where their talents in goldsmithing and textile production enriched the imperial court. This process of absorbing technologies, beliefs, and artists created a uniquely centralized state, the largest and most powerful the Andes had ever seen before the rise of the Inca. The entire coastline, with its rich fishing grounds and fertile valleys, became a single economic unit managed from the labyrinthine corridors of Chan Chan's royal compounds. This was the Chimu's enduring legacy, a blueprint for empire. They demonstrated that influence could be exercised through the management of resources and the integration of human talent, a model of administrative vision and territorial connection that the Inca would later observe, adopt, and ultimately perfect on a continental scale. The Inca Empire stretched along the Andes, a masterpiece of engineering and administration, yet its greatest challenge emerged not from its borders but from its very heart. After the great Emperor Huayna Capac's time came to an end, a deep rivalry divided the realm. His son Huascar held the historic capital of Cusco, representing the traditional heartland of the empire. His half-brother Atahualpa commanded the seasoned northern armies based in Quito. Their disagreement over the royal succession was not a simple dispute. It escalated into a full-scale civil war that unfolded along the spine of the Andes. Massive armies, the very strength of the empire, were turned inward against one another in a series of difficult engagements. The conflict drained the imperial treasury and cost the lives of countless experienced soldiers and commanders. More critically, it fractured the political unity Huayna Capac had so carefully built. Recently integrated peoples, still adjusting to Inca rule, saw the imperial family consumed by its own struggle and felt their loyalties tested. The empire was profoundly vulnerable, its attention entirely focused on this internal crisis. Then, at this precise moment of division, a Spanish expedition led by Francisco Pizarro made landfall. This small band of adventurers found not a unified state, but a realm divided against itself. They learned of the Great War between the brothers and saw a strategic opening. Marching inland, they requested an audience with the victorious Atahualpa, who had just secured control and believed the conflict was over. The meeting in the great square of Cajamarca was a collision of two worlds. The Spanish, though vastly outnumbered, leveraged the element of surprise and the shock of their steel and horses. In a swift and decisive action, they took Atahualpa captive. The emperor, now a prisoner, became a figure in a game he could not understand. He offered a legendary ransom of gold and silver to secure his release, rooms filled to the ceiling with treasures. The Spanish accepted the wealth, but the promise of freedom was broken. With Atahualpa removed from power, the Spanish skillfully worked with the existing political divisions. They presented themselves as liberators to those who had opposed Atahualpa, and as the new authority to those who had been loyal to him. The intricate network of Inca roads that had once bound the empire together now served as pathways for a foreign takeover. Without a clear central command and with its military leadership diminished by the recent war, the empire's resistance was fragmented. The Spanish, guided by local allies from rival groups, were able to reshape the vast political structure piece by piece. The story of the Spanish arrival is not one of inevitable conquest by a superior force, but a profound lesson in timing and internal discord. The Inca Civil War did not just weaken the empire, it effectively opened the way for a small group of outsiders to reshape a continent, altering the human and political landscape of South America in a single, transformative generation. Across the Mississippi River, earthen mounds rose like silent pyramids, marking the heart of a continent-wide civilization. The great city of Cahokia was the unquestioned center of this Mississippian world, a sprawling metropolis that at its peak around the year 1100 was larger than any contemporary city in northern Europe. Its central plaza, dominated by the 100-foot-tall Monk's Mound, was a stage for grand ceremonies that united a vast network of communities. But this was not a peaceful utopia. Archaeological findings reveal a landscape shaped by both profound cultural connection and periods of intense local friction. The very layout of Cahokia and its satellite towns tells a story of communities preparing for challenging times. Settlements were often positioned on high bluffs overlooking rivers, a strategic choice for both trade and oversight. More tellingly, many of these towns were surrounded by sturdy wooden palisades, walls made from thousands of logs sharpened at the top. These were not built for show, they were serious defensive structures, indicating a need for protection from neighboring groups. Within Cahokia itself, excavations have uncovered evidence of a society that sometimes honored its warriors in ways that startle modern observers. The resting places of some individuals, particularly those found in special mounds, show signs of ancient rituals that included the keeping of certain personal objects, suggesting a culture where martial achievement was deeply intertwined with spiritual authority and social rank. So what fueled these periods of disagreement among communities that shared so much culturally? The primary drivers were likely control over the most vital resources, the incredibly fertile river valleys that produced surplus harvests of corn, beans, and squash. Control of the waterways also meant command over trade, the flow of prized materials like copper from the Great Lakes, marine shells from the Gulf Coast, and special stones for making tools. When a powerful center like Cahokia began to lose its cohesive influence, perhaps due to environmental shifts or internal leadership struggles, the regional balance would have become unstable. Outlying chiefdoms may have sought greater autonomy, leading to conflicts over who would guide the trade networks and claim the most productive lands. The result was a gradual but profound reshaping of the entire eastern woodlands. As Cahokia's population dispersed, its people did not vanish. They migrated, carrying their knowledge and traditions to new areas. From this period of transition and realignment emerged the powerful, complex societies that European explorers would encounter centuries later. The Natchez people, with their Sun King and elaborate social tiers, and the expansive Kusa chiefdom, which commanded a network of towns across the southeast, were the political heirs to this earlier world. Their very existence is a testament to a dynamic North American history, one of rising central power, inevitable local challenges, and a constant, enduring process of cultural change that long preceded any outside contact. The greatest migration in human history unfolded not on land, but across 10,000 miles of open ocean. For centuries, Polynesian voyagers guided their double-hulled canoes into the unknown, navigating by the stars, the swell of the waves, and the flight paths of birds. This was not a peaceful wandering, it was a determined process of expansion that often began with discovery and continued with the challenge of building a new home. When a canoe fleet first sighted a new island, a sliver of green on an endless blue horizon, the initial landing party faced immense uncertainty. They had to secure a foothold, assess the resources, and prepare for the arrival of more canoes from their homeland. These were not empty lands waiting to be claimed. In many cases, later waves of settlers arrived to find earlier inhabitants already established, leading to periods of adjustment and sometimes intense competition for the most fertile valleys and sheltered fishing grounds. On small, isolated islands, every resource was precious. A single grove of breadfruit trees or a protected lagoon for fishing could become the focus of a lasting disagreement between rival lineages. The oral histories and legends of Polynesian societies are rich with the stories of these experiences. They tell of great leaders like Hawaii's Yumi, who had to navigate complex family dynamics and secure his rule through strategic alliances and personal resolve. In New Zealand, the Maori traditions recount the voyages of the Great Fleet and the subsequent interactions between iwi, or tribes, over territory and honor. These were not random events, but carefully managed processes governed by codes of conduct and spiritual beliefs. A challenge between chiefs might be settled through a single, structured encounter, its outcome accepted by both sides to avoid a larger, more drawn-out situation. The mastery of the sea was their ultimate strategic advantage. A lineage that felt pressured or sought new opportunities on one island could load their ancestors and their sacred plants into ocean-going canoes and set out to find a new destiny. This constant, cyclical process of settlement, interaction, and rediscovery effectively drew a human map across the Pacific, peopling every habitable island from Hawaii to Rapa Nui to Aotearoa. Each new society, forged in the isolation of its own little world, developed unique cultural traditions, yet they all shared a common ancestral memory of the sea as both a pathway and a proving ground. The Polynesian expansion stands as a powerful reminder that the drawing of the world's map was ultimately a human story, written in the wake of voyaging canoes and determined by the courage, the experiences, and the resilience of those who dared to sail beyond the horizon. A new sound echoed through the forests of Aotearoa, the sharp crack of a musket, and it announced a revolution in the art of war. For the Maori iwi, conflict had long been governed by a complex code of honor, where disputes were settled through carefully orchestrated encounters, often involving hand-to-hand combat with traditional weapons. The introduction of firearms from European traders shattered this ancient balance. Tribes like Ngapuhi, under the influential leader Hongi Hika, recognized the musket's power early. They traded vast quantities of flax and timber to acquire these new weapons, understanding that control over this technology meant survival and dominance. The musket was not merely a better tool, it was a strategic shock that rendered traditional wooden palisades, the fortified villages called pa, suddenly vulnerable to attack from a distance. An iwi armed with muskets could overwhelm a defending force before the traditional close-quarter fighting even began. This created a desperate arms race across the islands. Iwi who possessed muskets launched campaigns to secure more territory and resources, while those without them faced an impossible choice: retreat from their ancestral lands or risk a confrontation they could not win. The resulting period of conflict led to profound movements of people. Entire communities were displaced, seeking refuge in remote regions or being welcomed into the ranks of more powerful neighboring tribes. The map of tribal boundaries, which had been relatively stable for generations, was torn apart and redrawn with stunning speed. Some iwi, unable to recover from the loss of their warriors and lands, saw their independent identities fade, their members absorbed into larger, musket-armed coalitions. This internal transformation of Maori society, driven by the arrival of a single technology, created the very political landscape that British colonists would encounter just a few decades later. They did not find a static collection of ancient tribes, but a dynamic and recently reshaped network of powerful, battle-hardened iwi, each one a product of this turbulent and pivotal chapter. The musket wars stand as a stark lesson in how quickly a world can be unmade and remade, a final medieval-scale redrawing of the map, triggered not by a foreign army, but by the strategic choices of societies navigating a sudden and overwhelming change. These 35 conflicts scattered across the globe were not isolated events but threads in a single, vast tapestry of human ambition. When we step back, powerful patterns emerge, revealing that the medieval world was a single, interconnected system. The most consistent driver of conflict was the control of commerce. From the gold of West Africa to the spices of the Malacca Strait, empires rose and fell based on their ability to command the flow of wealth. The Ghana Empire built its power on trans-Saharan trade, just as the Srivijaya Navy patrolled the ocean choke points. To lose a trade route was to lose your lifeblood, making their defense a primary cause for war, a universal economic reality from the Andes to the Indian Ocean. Military technology acted as a great equalizer, its innovations spreading along those very trade routes and reshaping the balance of power. The introduction of the stirrup revolutionized cavalry warfare, creating the knight in Europe and the Mamluk lancer in Egypt. The composite bow, a masterpiece of engineering from the steppes, gave Mongol horse archers their remarkable range and accuracy. At sea, the lateen sail allowed Arab dhows and Polynesian canoes alike to tack against the wind, turning oceans into highways for exploration, trade, and movement. A single technological leap could redraw the map, as the Maori discovered when the musket arrived, transforming centuries of traditional combat in a single generation. Yet raw power was rarely enough without a compelling story. Across continents, political ambition fused with religious ideology to mobilize entire societies. Islamic rulers proclaimed spiritual campaigns to unite diverse peoples under a single banner, as seen with the Fatimid and Ghurid expansions. In Southeast Asia, Buddhist and Hindu kings presented themselves as universal monarchs, their temples serving as both spiritual and administrative centers of power. This fusion provided a justification for expansion, turning military campaigns into a sacred duty or a divine right, a psychological tool as potent as any army. Beneath all these human dramas, the environment set the stage. The vast, open grasslands of the Eurasian steppe were a perfect nursery for horse-based empires from the Mongols to the Seljuks. Conversely, the dense jungles of Cambodia forced the Khmer to become masters of hydraulic engineering and siege warfare. Broader climatic shifts, like the Little Ice Age, brought periods of hardship that could strain agricultural systems, displace populations, and push nomadic groups toward the richer lands of settled empires, triggering waves of migration and new encounters. Finally, the transition of one empire always created an opportunity for another. The passing of the Khwarazmian Empire opened the gates of Persia to the Mongols. The weakening of the Byzantine Empire after Manzikert allowed the Seljuks to settle Anatolia. This was a world of constant political dominoes, where the decline of a major power sent ripples through its region, creating openings that ambitious neighbors were all too eager to fill. The medieval world was not a collection of separate stories, but a dynamic and relentless engine of cause and effect, where a battle in the Levant could inspire a crusade in Europe, and a trade dispute in India could send a fleet to the shores of Sumatra. The map was never static. It was a living document, continually rewritten by the universal forces of commerce, technology, belief, and the ever-changing Earth itself. From the sands of the Sahara to the islands of Polynesia, we have journeyed across a world in motion, a planet reshaped by 35 monumental conflicts that unfolded far from the familiar story of medieval Europe. These wars were never isolated events, but powerful threads woven into a single, vast tapestry of human ambition, innovation, and profound interaction. They remind us with startling clarity that history is, and always has been, a global story. The very borders we see on modern maps, the cultural traditions that define nations, and the enduring power structures of our time were all forged in these distant crucibles of change. This expanded view of our shared past invites us to look deeper, to question the old narratives and discover the interconnected currents that truly shaped our world. We would love to hear which of these events surprised you the most, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are ready to continue exploring the untold stories that shaped our planet, be sure to subscribe for the next chapter in our journey